Southern Africa has witnessed a remarkable journey of democracy. From liberation movements to multi-party governance, the region stands as one of the most politically stable and democratic in Africa. But how do we get here? And where is democracy headed? This is what we'll tell of Southern Africa's democracy story. In the 20th century, Southern Africa's major objective was to gain independence, and that fight was one of resilience. And this was in order to fight colonial times. It is only after independence that a lot of African countries, and in Southern Africa, started looking towards democracy as a center of their style of governance. The journey was not easy.
In 1960, the United Nations passed a resolution called Resolution 1514 on the granting of independence to colonial peoples and on the right to self-determination. So on the basis of that, which became a UN principle, we as liberation movements, UNIP, was able to petition the United Kingdom at the UN to grant independence to Zambia. And so we were so grateful for the role that the UN had played and for the role that this resolution 1514 had played, that we decided that we will choose a date for our independence, which is the United Nations Day. So 24th of October is United Nations Day. It was to honor the UN, and subsequently the OAU, the role it played when it was established in mobilizing resources to fight for the independence of our respective countries. At the time of our independence, only 3 of our 8 neighbors were independent themselves. Now, because we benefited from the solidarity of others, one of our basic foreign policy principles was that we too were obligated to support others who were fighting for their independence.
No country today can exist without diplomatic, political, economic, military, and political assistance from other countries.
Zambia was the headquarters of almost all the freedom fighters organizations in Southern Africa. We had Frelimo with some other parties there from Mozambique in South Africa. We had Zimbabwe, we had Angola. So we have, as a country, been playing major roles in seeking peace in the region.
In 1967, President Kaunda, President Milton Obote of Uganda, President Nyerere of Tanzania met in Lusaka and established the Mulungushi Club. The Mulungushi Club was about how do we coordinate our efforts to help our colleagues in the region, in the countries that were still under colonial rule. So we established now an organization called the Frontline States.
The whole idea for the Frontline States was to bring our resources together, make ourselves open to the struggles of other nations within the region in order to help them attain their independence. And you remember that at that time, Zambia became a pivotal country, not only in pushing for the total independence of the region, but it also became a haven for those freedom fighters from South Africa, from Angola, from Namibia, from Zimbabwe. They all came and camped here while they waged their independence wars against colonial rule. It was that spirit of ensuring that we have total independence for our people in the region that prompted the establishment of the frontline states.
And in 1980, President Khama, SADC Khama of Botswana, suggested that we establish a similar grouping, but that focused on coordination of our economic efforts, because all of us had economies that were dependent in one way or another on South Africa. But now we were fighting apartheid in South Africa. And because South Africa had such economic stranglehold on our countries, there was a limit to which we could fight South Africa. And that was the birth of SADC. So it was established here in Lusaka, following the suggestion in 1980 by Sir SADC Khama. In 1996, we then transformed what used to be the frontline states into the SADC organ on politics, defense, and security cooperation.
The role of SADC after we got our independence was basically now to create a community of nations that creates an opportunity for the countries to learn from one another in the manner in which we are making progress in following through with what we call democratic tenets. So SADC stands there as a moderator that helps us maintain the democracy that we are currently embracing in order to maintain peace and unity in the nations. If Zambia is peaceful, but the neighbor is not peaceful, the whole region is not peaceful. Dr. Kenneth Kaunda used to say, if Zimbabwe is not free, if Mozambique is not free, if Namibia is not free, then Zambia cannot claim to be free. It is the spirit of SADC that these countries that have come together are now working together to maintain peace and unity in the region, and also, most importantly today, to ensure the observance of democratic tenets in order for peace to prevail in our region.
I think it's healthy to have an opposition which is effective, because it keeps the government on its toes.
When we started off at independence in 1966, that was when the foundation was laid to be a democratic republic. And we based already within our cultural system, our traditional systems, we already had a strong base for democracy, freedom of speech, consultation, tolerance. And that is something that has played out throughout the majority of the years. I say majority of the years. We did have if I can put it mildly, a slight hiccup from 2018 until 2024.
Various scholars were describing Botswana as a shining example of true democracy, an African miracle, exceptional, and all these other accolades. However, when you look on the other side, on the flip side, was the less complimentary labels, like that Botswana was an authoritarian liberal state owing to the strong executive, which was difficult to control either through the judiciary or the legislature or other important democratic institutions. And also that it was a de facto one-party state, in the sense that whilst there was multi-party democratic dispensation, only one party won elections throughout for 58 years.
Botswana in a way stagnated a bit, because when we started off in the late 60s, when we gained our independence, we were compared to our neighbors. In this case, apartheid South Africa, North Namibia as well was the same thing. So we earned the tag of a well-behaved boy, because we were being compared to the West available. So we need to do the minimum required for us to be considered to be behaving well.
So we have now passed the ultimate test. We had a change of government after 58 years, and the exchange of power was seamless, it was peaceful, and I think we believe it's a lesson to many in the region that indeed democracy is alive in Africa, democracy is possible in Africa, as long as the will of the people is respected, and that which the people have expressed as what they want to see happening is allowed to take root.
I can never sell out Africa, never. Not me, not these boys here, not these girls here. We are men and women of principle. We have done all these things in search of peace, but it has to be genuine peace, based on sincere, genuine majority rule. Anything else, you can kill us. Zambians will be born out of our blood, will continue to fight. We are such a people.
Zambia led the way in terms of change. We had a liberation party, UNIP, for many, many years. You know, the former president led this country for 27 years. UNIP was in power for 27 years. And I think we led the way. And with what happened in Zambia in 1991, I think other countries in the region began to think, well, change is possible. Yes, we're very, very grateful for all our liberation heroes, the liberation parties. But sometimes, context calls for change.
Zambia is a positive story in terms of our democracy. I think just the fact that Zambians hold the view that you should never be in status unless people put you there is a huge positive. The fact that the leaders, no matter how foolish they become when they come into office, we put them there is important. And it adds to our stability. Take that away, countries end up in war. If you take away from citizens the fact that if these guys don't deliver, I can keep changing it, doesn't matter. It's a strong view to hold. It's a very important, I think, in a country. The most important part of a democracy is in between elections, not only on election. Election day gives you the right to put someone in office. But after that, before the next election, is when you, the citizen, should benefit from it. If nothing is happening in between the elections, then that democracy is ailing to a large extent, it's unwell.
As the 1990s dawned, multi-party elections became the new norm. The winds of change swept through the region, with Namibia and South Africa leading the way, embracing the principles of democracy, rule of law, and human rights.
The time for the healing of the wounds has come. The moment to bridge the chasms that divide us has come. The time to build is upon us.
We have demonstrated since 1994 that we are committed to maintain the values and principles enshrined in our constitution, a commitment that the people of South Africa made amongst themselves, that as long as there is democracy, government will be by the will of the people. And yes, there are challenges in terms of participation, voter apathy. I mean, in 1994, in the first elections, we had about 85% voter turnout. In the last elections, it was just about 55%. That's a bigger worry. And the fact that it's mostly young people who are staying away from the polls, it's even worrying around the future of democracy. It doesn't mean they're not involved in politics. Yes, they are, in various ways, and probably staying away from the polls is part of a political statement that they are making. But I think it's it's so part of the discussions that are happening currently in South Africa is to look at electoral reforms and how those can take into consideration the last 30 years of our democracy and how we can improve our electoral processes so that we can involve as many people as possible.
The 2024 elections were a very interesting time, watching an ANC that's been in charge for 30 years go under, and believe it or not, accepted with grace isn't what we see on our continent. It is what is fearful when you're an African and you're watching the African stories, that do you have leaders that rise to the occasion and that allow for democracy, because they speak it so often, but when you even look at the region, they don't fully practice it. That's why you have so many protests calling for the downfall of particular regimes, questions about particular elections. So I think it's important to say, I think South Africa is maturing still. 30 years is not enough to have called us, I think, a matured democracy, and in part because some of the issues that were flagged in that transition, or that necessitated or demanded for transition and for equality, haven't been addressed. I mean, I'm not a big proponent of equality. I always make an argument that I want equity, and the fact that I still say I want it is part and parcel of explaining that we are not where we ought to be. So the issues that necessitated a shift from the previous regime, those haven't been addressed.
Democracy in SADC has not been without struggles. There has been political unrest, election disputes, and the heart of it has been in ensuring that democracy is not just a form of governance, but adds substance and value to people's lives.
Our campaign story was, look, the BDP has been in power for 58 years. That's a long time. And then, of course, it was at a time when everybody could see that this party has been in power for too long. And they now started taking things for granted, taking people for granted, not listening to people doing things, laissez-faire sort of thing. And we highlighted on these things.
I'm a member of the Botswana Democratic Party that just didn't gain the election. I was very happy that the opposition won, because having been a student of politics and having been, understanding how politics work, that it has to be maybe for the first, at the most, the first 20 years. After that, there must be a change of government. It was about time there was change. It was about time there is change, because I understood it to be that way, having been exposed to other democracies across the world.
We've been ticking the right boxes, like I said, but the minimum required. For 58 years, we had de facto one-party state. We were having elections that were returning the same party to office all the time. Sometimes even with a reduced popularity in terms of the votes received, but increased seats in parliament because of the electoral system we use, first past the post. But even with those challenges, in the last election, yes, we experienced a transition from one ruling party to a different one. It's a significant development for Botswana. It says to the voter, you can change a government through the vote. But I think the new government knows pretty well that the nation feels sufficiently empowered to take the necessary steps at the next elections, should they not deliver on the key pledges that they made.
Democracy in our region and governance in our region isn't too bad. Of course, it needs improvement. There is need for constant improvement. Nobody is 100%. But some of the issues that we have with our democracies are structural issues. For instance, I don't think there is any SADC country that finances political parties. The financing determines how effective you can be in your participation, because you have to reach all the areas of our countries. Our countries are very big. And if you have to campaign, you have to campaign in every country, every part of the country. How do you get there? Without funding. And governments in our region, can they sustain funding all the political players? That is a challenge. And until we address the issue of how to fund, how to sustain political parties, we cannot really have a completely free and fair electoral process in any country. Because the danger we have is that we leave space for foreigners to then finance and therefore interfere in our political processes. And there is no such thing as a free lunch. And it is not always in your interest what the funder may want, or not always in the interest of the country. So we have that challenge.
I talked about the funding of political parties. Even when I was in the ruling party, and the ruling party was too comfortable, they didn't think it's necessary. You know what? It's a fact. If I'm in power and you are a businessman, there are two political parties here. One is in power, one in opposition. Which one are you likely to lean towards funding? It's the ruling party. That's why everybody was pouring their millions into the ruling party, and the opposition parties got nothing.
The measure and the worth of any political party, you can judge from the support it gets from the voters. And if you're worth anything, you will get donations and sponsorship coming in that way. So your shortfall shouldn't be covered from taxpayers' money, from public funds. And then the second thing is that, how do you judge how much to give which party? You know, there are those who say you give the bigger parties more than the smaller ones. But then if you give the bigger parties more, you're then entrenching the status quo. So when you go to an election, the playing fields are supposed to be equal. So everyone should get the same amount, because you're all starting from scratch. So I just think with all those kind of challenges in applying it, I don't think there's any fair way that you can actually give public funds to political parties.
A lot of thinking should go into the method of distribution. And we are not a rich country, let's face it. The playing field is not normal. You have to deal with this playing field so that you can compete from an equitable position.
The former ruling party, the BDP, in my opinion, I don't know how much they used, but in my opinion, from what we saw, used more money than ever before in the history of Botswana. They threw money at this campaign, and yet they lost so badly. So it's not all about money, it's all about delivery. And that is where your investment comes from. If you want to talk about financial resources, let's talk about the resources that you put into improving the welfare of people. That is what's going to count, and not how much money you've got.
We also have institutions that are meant to run the elections, like our Electoral Management Board, whose independence is compromised in the sense that key appointments are not done in a transparent manner, open to oversight by other institutions. The same goes for the judiciary. The executive plays a dominant role in determining who becomes a judge in this country. It's not necessarily based on merit, and therefore there are instances where one would reasonably suspect that it's appointment of judges who are friendly to the establishment. That compromises the quality of our democracy.
I think the new government which came into office have had the advantage of seeing how things went wrong under the previous administration. And they were very vocal in pointing out the lapses and the decline, the deficit in our democracy under the previous regime.
Well, an average Botswana is looking for consolidation of democracy in Botswana. Democracy is consolidated in Botswana in the Huntington dictum, in the sense that a ruling party lost the elections and the opposition became a ruling party. So that we have passed the test. But most importantly, they want hope to be restored, integrity restored in democratic institutions. They need a judiciary that is fair, a judiciary that is transparent, a judiciary that has integrity and that they have confidence in. They want a parliament that is able to provide effective oversight on the executive, that can make laws for the peace, order and good government of Botswana. Good government meaning that laws that can curb corruption, laws that can promote transparency and accountability. A parliament that can represent their views. Because parliament, as Churchill has said, is the workshop of democracy. It's a barometer of public opinion, and that is what Botswana expects. They want to see accountable leaders, less corrupt leaders. Leaders who can run the economy efficiently, effectively, and create jobs.
We have a story. We have a story that is anchored on our value system, which is the rule of, the respect for the rule of law, good governance, and much more importantly, the respect for the will of the people. And we are saying together, if we adopt these things, these values, and this value system, we would have done we would have answered much of the questions in terms of peace and security, for example. Much of the lack of security, much of the conflicts emanate from post-electoral conflicts, because people do not trust the outcome, because in the beginning, they didn't have confidence in the process and everything wasn't done in a transparent manner. So if we solve this, we have solved many of the problems that are in the region.
I think also confidence that a country can remain stable despite a change of government. So there is that level of influence. Whether it will actually happen that a country will change government because one did, I don't think that's necessarily true, because that's where context comes into place. Because we were able to change government in 2021 and in 2011 because we had a solid alternative to the sitting government. There are times where they can be discontent as high as it wants, but the inability of citizens to coalesce around an individual, a political party, might be the only reason why there's no change of government, even if people wanted it. So having a solid alternative is a contextual matter. It's not something that can be exported from one country to another.
Today, youth in Southern Africa are at the forefront of political activism. With tools such as social media, they're holding leaders accountable and forging democracy, making it stronger each day.
What's beautiful about South Africa's democracy is we love freedom. South Africans are attached to the idea of being a free nation. We love our freedoms to be. And if you engage South Africans, you very quickly get a sense of that. I mean, people always speak about what South Africans are like online. It's a loud, robust, really wonderful country where people say what they want to say, where people don't fear their president. That's such a beautiful aspect of who we are. But it is the things that I've raised that put that democracy at risk, right? It is not addressing the issues around inequality, the economy not changing, ownership patterns remaining in the hands of the minority. It is looking at the farming sector, and by and large, the labor and the farms are black. And the people who are farm owners are minority. You have a small white community, yet it has over 70% of the land. It is not being able to address those things properly that put this democracy at risk. There have always been threats, and it's been done in reports and studies, that South Africa will face bread riots. Absolutely, because the majority every other day cannot afford to live here. And if you don't answer those questions on those issues, and crime and people not feeling safe, that democracy cannot not be at risk. It absolutely is at risk. And the fact that South Africans don't fully participate in it is part of the problem.
part of the people who hold the future of our democracy in their hands is young people. Democratic government on their own are also not enough. It also means that young people must have a confidence in the system. It means that it's a system that works for them, a system that ensures that they are self-sufficient as individuals, and not a system that keep them hamstrung in poverty, in unemployment, inequality. And so it's not only about what happens on voting day, it's also about what happens in the process and period of governance, and whether young people are heard and they see that a government is a government that belongs to them.
When you look at the elections, and we don't even care, if you think about it, about the elections. Our elections outcomes show that the turnout, the participation is on a continuous decline. We were so hopeful in 2024 that young people are at the helm, are on the rise. They will tell us what they want of this country. They didn't take to the polls. So we have an actual crisis on our hands as far as the participation in elections is concerned. And that also tells that if they can't be interested, if they don't show interest rather in elections, then they will show no interest in the everyday avenues, instruments to hold leaders accountable, to participate in the democracy. That's where we have a problem. Civic education is a crisis problem point in this country. I think people don't know their councillors, don't know how to hold them accountable. They don't know what and how to engage with their parliaments, their legislatures, in order to hold leaders accountable. So it almost feels like they feel, when you engage South Africans sometimes, it almost feels like they think that they're powerless, yet the instruments are there. There's this constitution that they love, this book that they speak of, the law of the land, that says to them, actually, you're not powerless, that these people govern at your behest.
We haven't resolved the national question in South Africa. We still, I think, see each other as suspect, if we put it in racial context. And I think you've seen how some of the white South Africa, sections of white South Africans led by their different organizations have gone out, for instance, to go and complain about how unsafe they feel in this country. And what is democracy if it cannot meet the basic demands of a people? So I think that could constitute part of a threat. What is comforting, I think, is the fact that through the government of national unity, most of the political parties have committed to work together. I think the first time, because the first GNU was completely different and under different conditions. But I think the fact that we're showing that level of political maturity, that we have to sit down, even if we couldn't adopt the budget at some point, but we agree that we have to sit down and talk things through. That's important. But as long as we don't resolve the national question, as long as we do not resolve some of the socio-economic challenges that still hang on, I think that represents a big threat of the democracy as we currently know it.
The SADC region has made significant strides in ensuring that elections are free, fair, and peaceful. But with each election, there is a growing demand for greater participation, especially from youth and women.
SADC has a protocol signed by all member states on the conduct of free and fair elections. And that protocol has been violated a number of times in a number of countries in the SADC region when they had elections. And even when SADC occasionally, and it's fairly rare, will come out with a report after an election which may indicate that an election wasn't free and fair, it ends there, nothing happens. So when you have the regional body which put in place its own protocol on how it wants to enhance democracy, not abiding or implementing or enforcing their own protocols amongst member states, then you're just going to see the violation of credible elections perpetuating as time goes on.
This issue of learning from one another and to see how democracy is being handled by different member countries, it helps us in the overall to ensure that we end up with some kind of uniformity in how to demonstrate democratic tenets across the board. Have we succeeded as SADC in achieving this? I don't think so, not yet. It's a work in progress. But I can tell you that if SADC was non-existent, we would see quite a lot of disunity, we would see a lot of insecurity in the region, and therefore the role of SADC cannot be underemphasized. It's extremely crucial.
There is no doubt in my mind that the mere presence of the election observers is extremely important, because without that presence, the parties would do all sorts of things to each other, because they will have the comfort that nobody is seeing. So a lot of extremes and excesses that otherwise would happen on the ground are prevented from happening because they know that SADC is observing.
It would be naive of any of us as citizens of this region to believe that countries that share such close proximity, not only in terms of the border, but in terms of the people themselves, in terms of the culture that we share, in terms of the fact that we have been in close relations, friendly relations with these countries from time immemorial, from the time that this country was born. I think we owe a responsibility to the SADC region. We owe a responsibility to ourselves. It's without question that our prosperity as a region is dependent on the level of peace and stability that we enjoy. All of us that participate in SADC stand to benefit from an environment in which we can thrive.
Election observation missions are one of the greatest things that we have been able to have in the region. The impact that these play go far beyond what the public knows, and they greatly help in not only making our countries meet the minimum standards. You'll be surprised at just how many policy changes, laws that have been created in SADC countries at the instigation of SADC, because these countries need to meet the minimum standards. So it plays a very, very positive role, and I hope that our countries will reposit the support and confidence they have in this instrument.
Well, I would like to see a new Botswana. I would like to see a consolidated democracy, not just based on elections, but on developed democratic institutions, such as your supreme audit institutions, your public protector or ombudsman, your prosecution units, your independent electoral commission, the electoral management board, your parliament, that is a high-performing parliament that is able to make laws, that is able to provide oversight, that is able to represent the people, and a judiciary that has integrity, that the public has confidence in, and leaders which are accountable, a transparent country, a country with an economy that works for all, that is able to create jobs, that is able to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor, that is able to put the economy in the hands of indigenous Black Africans. It's very, very important. An economy that will be able to alleviate poverty. So these are the Botswana that I want to see. A Botswana that is digitalized, a Botswana that offers opportunities for its young people.
I foresee greater participation by young people going forward. I think we have the youngest ever Speaker of the National Assembly. He's also the youngest Speaker in the SADC region. So I think they can now see that, look, we have made a significant shift, even symbolically, face-wise, from the old pensioners performing the duty of speakers.
We believe the youth are not leaders of tomorrow, they are leaders now. If you look at our population, is largely youthful. So if we disenfranchise them, we are literally keeping the majority of the population out of decision making. That's the first big mistake that you can make.
We consistently and continuously engage with young people, through leadership camps, and so on. And the idea is that we need to connect with, our history, but we also need to understand where we are now if we are to help determine what the future of the country will be.
Africans demand democracy, but they demand democracy. Some African leaders will not give this democracy on the silver platter, and it's up to the young people to go out there and vote for those leaders that they think can take them forward. And some of those leaders, or many of those leaders, are actually amongst themselves as the African youth. They need to take charge, they need to chart their own path and be responsible for their own destiny. Not just at voting, but at holding their leaders accountable.
One wonders why it is always men. I want to see a Botswana that is fully prosperous because we have the participation of everybody in development.
As we journey into the future, I have a feeling we should take the best of our culture and discard the culture that is not good for us as a nation. So by this time, I have a feeling that women should now be in higher positions of power. I mean, here we are. There is a Namibian woman president. Why not here?
It is quite urgent, that we, not only strengthen the AU, not only strengthen our regional bodies, but also share experiences around how all of us have been able to deal with situations such as this before, and think about how we move forward, as a continent.
We've had overall peaceful elections that are able to deliver the will of the people, are able to change government without destabilizing the country. Because the difference between you having a peaceful environment, okay? You've had an election, but you have not gone to war, is unspeakable. So I think we should understand that democracy as an end in itself is something to promote. It's something that is good for citizens, especially the weak and the poor.
To any country, any government that thinks they have a right from birth to rule, they will have a rude awakening someday. Once you empower people politically, you educate them to know that this ballot has power, they will do the right thing.
If you see white families, particularly local government elections, because that speaks to your immediate environment, if you pay attention, it's a family outing to the polls. It's not an individual. They conscientize their children from a young age about the power of a vote, the power of the ballot, and going out as a family to recognize what the moment is. Of course, the children are underage and can't vote, but they grow up understanding that there's this process that their parents participate in. So even right down to that, we haven't made it the culture that it ought to be for the majority, where it's not a holiday. It's not a day to kick back. It's a day where actually you do your part, you take responsibility for shaping the trajectory of your country.
If more opposition parties can win state power, that could create an environment, a conducive environment for transformation. They don't have a bone to grind to preserve the current status quo. They have been calling for changes to happen. If enough opposition parties can win power, I think that will be the starting ground for transformation towards democratization in Southern Africa.
Those with very deep pockets also have the greatest access to media. And those who control the media control public opinion. And so there is always a danger that a public opinion can be created that may not necessarily be the right or the truth on the ground. And that public opinion can lead to conflict, can foment conflict, depending on the interests of those who are funding the political systems. So for me, this is the greatest challenge we have. Our capacity to finance the electoral systems, the entire electoral spectrum, and the political parties. It is not, in most of our elections in Africa, our electoral commissions are inadequately funded, at least from the government coffers. And inevitably, almost all our electoral processes tend to have huge components of external donor funding. And with that comes the compromises that sometimes exist in our electoral systems. That, to me, is the greater challenge that we must address.
I think one of the biggest lessons from our region is acceptance of election results. And I think that we've had sometimes when that hasn't been the case, but I think generally as a region, from that score, I think the other regions have lessons to learn from us, and that, there can be peaceful transfer of power from one party to the other.
Zambia, of course, has always been the home for change of political parties at an election. Zimbabwe remains the hot potato, and I do think that with time again, they will hopefully see some changes there. So I'm optimistic about the future for both my country and my region.
Elections should not threaten the peace and security and should not be instigators to conflict in our countries. They are an important instrument in governance. And this constant appeal to external parties, external players to come in our space is not something that is edifying for us as Africans. We have all the means that we need to conduct our elections peacefully, fairly, not because foreign players want us to have democracy, but because it is an obligation that all political players have to our people, to our citizens.
But I think that democracy is a very fragile thing. And even in a country like Zambia, I think that if democracy does not deliver improved lives, yes, it becomes academic. Whether it gets thrown away is a different question altogether, because the point is, what do you replace it with?
Botswana has taken an important step of experiencing a change of government through peaceful elections. If the new rulers can manage this scenario in such a way that the presidents from the previous regimes don't go to prison, that would be an important lesson to Africa. Already. No, you can rule and retire and still be safe, because they usually fear for their safety. But once they are out of power, the new government will take them to task and imprison them. We will have to teach Africa that no, you can actually retire and live a peaceful life. That could be an important lesson to the rest of Africa to follow.
When you talk about ruling parties and opposition parties, there is a lot of intolerance of opposition parties. But that is not the case in Botswana at the moment. In other countries in the region, there is a lot of intolerance. And people should be able to choose what political parties they want to belong to without being punished for it. Just like if you have a football team that you want to support, you're free to do so. And no one cares about that.
So democracy, my belief is that it has to be participatory. It has to be more than just where the rulers are chosen by the ruled. But it must most importantly be about the rulers acting in the interest of the ruled. And for that to happen, all must be involved in public policy making. All must be involved in law making. And that for that to happen, there also has to be a high level of transparency. And transparency will also, trigger accountability.
We are looking forward for democracy to improve and actually propel to excellent heights. And I'm not seeing it in the near future unless women stand up. Because, they have long fought for equality and injustice. And it doesn't look like we are making progress. So maybe we need a brand new strategy for the future of Botswana to actually have women in positions of power. If I was not 84 years old, I would actually start campaigning for the presidency of this country. And I think I would make it.
As the sun sets on this generation of political leaders, it is democracy that makes it possible for the mantle to be passed on and peacefully pleasing the will of the people.